Tonight on Talking Politics, when she was running for state auditor, Diana DiZoglio promised to shake up Beacon Hill if she won. Now, a couple months into her tenure, that's exactly what she's doing. She's launched audits of the T, the Mass Convention Center Authority, and the state legislature, which may not be inclined to give DiZoglio the openness she's demanding. In a few minutes, I'll speak with her about those investigations, what she's planning next, and the range of powers her office actually has. But first, a month and a half ago, in an interview with GBH's Boston Public Radio, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was asked if President Joe Biden should run for re-election in 2024. Her answer was unequivocal.
Yes, he should run again, and he is running again.
Then Warren was asked if Biden should once again choose current Vice President Kamala Harris as his running mate. Her answer to that question was squishier.
I really want to defer to what makes Biden comfortable on his team. I've known Kamala for a long time. I like Kamala. I knew her back when she was an attorney general and I was still teaching, and we worked on the housing crisis together. So we go way back, but they have to be a team, and my sense is they are. I don't mean that by suggesting I think there are any problems. I think they are.
A couple days later, Warren issued a clarification saying, quote, "I fully support the president's and vice president's re-election together and never intended to imply otherwise." And then the story faded away until this week when CNN reported that Warren has called Harris twice to apologize for her remarks and that Harris hasn't called back. That same report said many Harris confidants were infuriated by Warren's comments, which they saw as, quote, "the latest in a long string of snubs to a vice president they say has never gotten the respect or support she deserves." So were Warren's comments an innocuous stumble or something more strategic? And whatever her intentions were, what does the current narrative around Harris tell us about her, her critics, and Democrats' hopes and fears heading into 2024? Joining me to break it all down are Renée Graham, an opinion columnist and associate editor at the Boston Globe, and my GBH News colleague, Callie Crossley, the host of Basic Black and Under the Radar. Thank you both for being here. Renée, when Elizabeth Warren originally made those comments, what did you make of them?
You know, it's interesting because Elizabeth Warren very rarely makes headlines for the wrong reasons. And she did that this time. That answer was a mess. She was able to, answer very quickly and very forcefully about whether or not President Biden should run again. But that kind of wishy-washy, equivocating answer she attempted to give, she could even call an answer to whether or not Kamala Harris should man the ticket. It reinforced this really terrible narrative that just won't go away about Vice President Harris and what she brings to the ticket, what a detriment she might be to the ticket. This has always been the case, and we know why the case is because she is a woman of color and because she is a woman, and she does not look like everybody else who's had that job. So the scrutiny on her is always very different to those who came before her, but you wouldn't have expected that to come from Elizabeth Warren.
Callie Crossley, did you see Warren as intentionally feeding that narrative that Renée is talking about, or unintentionally doing something that amplified it?
I say unintentionally, and when I wrote about this, I pointed to the pause. So the question was asked by our Marjorie Egan, and then she paused before she spoke. And that let a lot of people fill in the blank. What does that mean? Because to Renée's point, she didn't immediately say yes or whatever she was going to say. And so then I think she realized, oh, God, that sounds bad. Let me now try to fix it. And then it just didn't get fixed in the way that I would think that she wanted it to be fixed. Yeah.
And the explanation we should mention that's come from commentators sympathetic to Warren, I believe from the Warren camp itself, is that she didn't do a great job in that response. She was trying to be suitably deferential to President Biden, didn't want to step on his toes. Again, that's one way of looking at it. So were the two of you, given that, were you surprised by CNN's report that Kamala Harris has not returned Elizabeth Warren's calls? Kelly, you hop in first, and then we'll go to you, Renée.
I was surprised. I also wonder, is that right? It leaves me, I just don't know, because to whose benefit is it for CNN or somebody to be told that Senator Warren had called and that Vice President Kamala Harris did not respond.
That's a good point.
So I'm just
being
like,
suspicious
why?
of this, the whole narrative is probably going to go.
It sounds like this is a situation where you could take this conversation offline, the two of them. It's not that they don't know each other. That was made clear. So if there was conversation to be had about how either of them felt, why would I want it to be known that I either called or didn't get a response or vice versa?
Right. And Renee, how about you? Did that report take you by surprise?
Well, I agree with what Callie said. Again, let's talk about the narrative and who benefits from this narrative. So now if you have the Senator Warren makes this comment and now, Vice President hasn't called her back and she's called her twice. What are they saying? It's, again, feeding into this idea of somehow that Kamala Harris is a problem, that she's not playing nice, that she is a drug on the all of these things. And again, why even report it? Who's the person behind this? Is this being leaked from Harris's camp? I doubt. Would this be from Warren's camp? I doubt that as well. So I'm suspicious of all of that.
As we talk about the big narrative right now around Kamala Harris, one key piece of this, I believe, was a New York Times piece that ran in early February. I want to quote from it really quickly here. And forgive me, I seem to have buried my quote. Here we go. In private conversations over the last few months, the story said, dozens of Democrats in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and around the nation, including some who helped put her on the party's 2020 ticket, said she has not risen to the challenge of proving herself as a future leader of the party, much less the country. Renee, I went back and looked at some columns you've done over the past few months. Your contention is that is exactly wrong, right? That Kamala Harris deserves credit for in a couple areas where she's not getting it. What are the areas where you see that happening?
Well, for me, the most obvious one is how she took up the topic of Roe v. Wade and abortion before the midterms. There was this, after the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, that everyone had just moved on, which was the most absurd thing I've ever heard, because people don't just move on having their rights taken away from them. And she made that her cause. She went to colleges, she spoke, she gave speeches. She made sure that abortion rights and reproductive rights stayed front and center going into the midterm elections. And we now know that that was a leading issue for a lot of voters. Everyone kept telling, no, forget about abortion, it's all about the economy. But it turned out that there were a lot of men and women who were very concerned about what was happening in this country with reproductive rights. And I don't think she got enough credit for that. And I think that that's a big reason why the Democrats not only extended, picked up an extra seat in the Senate, but also kept down the bleeding in the everyone it was assuming was going to happen, that it was going to be a bloodbath. It wasn't. And I think that's because she had her eye on that prize and understood an issue that was going to be important that the pundits completely missed.
You make a really compelling case in your column about that. I actually had not seen video of her appearance at Bryn Mawr until I read your piece. I want to show a little bit of it here because it points up everything you're talking about. Let's take a look.
Look where we are. The highest court in our land, the United States Supreme Court, just took a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, from the women of America. And on this subject, I think it's important to note that one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be making this decision for her.
And to your point, Renee Graham, that was at the end of October, a couple of days before the midterms. Callie, you wrote a piece recently in which you talked about watching Harris speak at the funeral for Tyre Nichols and realizing, as you watched her there, the extent to which her voice has been turned down, muted, minimized in recent months. Let's take first a look at some of what she had to say at Tyre Nichols' funeral and then come back and talk about it.
As Vice President of the United States, we demand that Congress pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Joe Biden will sign it. And we should not delay, and we will not be denied. It is non-negotiable.
Callie, you wrote about that, and you suggested that maybe someone is trying to get Harris to be quieter, but that she might also be doing that to herself. And that was a possibility that had never occurred to me. Why might she be muting herself?
Well, you know, there's all that external and internal party pressure that you just referred to in the New York Times. So if the New York Times is reporting it from wherever their many sources are, you can imagine what's on top of her every day, you know, coming from every direction.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, I have watched this woman over many years. I've written about 4 or 5 pieces prior to her getting this job about how powerful she is, about how strong, about how she is able to really cut to the chase when need be, and make it quite clear about what the issues are and the ways in which we might address them. And I just thought, what's happening? That is she being allowed to, or does she feel like, let me step back, because some suggested, would she overshadow the president? Now, I'm assuming the two of them have a good enough relationship to figure that out. I thought they had. So I've been puzzled by that. Now, I want to say, I wrote that piece before she went to Munich for the security conference. And when she went to the security conference, that was the Kamala Harris I know. She was out front. She was saying, this is what we're going to do. Blah, 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 blah. It was, so I don't know. Maybe she felt like she could really step into her own because she could get away from Washington, for one thing. So, yeah.
Closing question. We've only got a couple seconds left, but is it possible that the attacks on Harris, in addition to, as you said, Renee, maybe reflecting misogyny, racism, that they also reflect pent-up Democratic ambition, because Biden's not going anywhere, and also maybe anxiety about Biden himself, but you can't talk about whether he should run again, so you pick on his number 2. Is that a possibility? Renee, you first, then Callie.
Oh, I don't know that we're having the same conversation about Kamala Harris if Joe Biden isn't 80 years old. So much of this is about what will happen if something happens to Biden and who's in that number 2 spot.
Yeah.
I think that is part of the scrutiny that Kamala Harris is getting.
Okay, Callie, last word to you.
Yeah, I would say that is definitely the case, because people are saying, okay, what does it look like if she's in the chair and she has her hand on the red button, and how do I feel about that?
Something worth keeping in mind every time we hear this. It's also about the number 1. Callie Crossley, Renee Graham, thank you both.
Thank you.
Next up, when it comes to political drama, the office of the Massachusetts State Auditor tends to be something of an afterthought, but my next guest is changing that in a hurry. Earlier this month, new State Auditor Diana DiZoglio announced that she was launching an expansive review of the Massachusetts legislature, a notoriously opaque body where she formerly served as an aide, a state rep, and a state senator. DiZoglio has also launched audits of the depressingly dysfunctional MBTA system and of the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority, which stands accused of discriminating against black employees and vendors. It is a fast start that points up DiZoglio's expansive vision of her office's authority, a vision not everyone agrees with. Diana DiZoglio joins me now. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So with your audit of the legislature, what are you hoping to learn about that body that we do not already know?
Yeah, so just a little bit of history here for folks. The state legislature actually has been audited before, but it hasn't been audited since 1922. Financially speaking, at least according to the records that we've been able to find, we're still looking through some of the other records that exist in places like the State House Library and other places.
And that was when the auditor was sort of a bookkeeper for the state, right? They documented incoming money in the legislature, outgoing spending, and that was about it.
Yeah, they audited the legislature. I think that's the important point here, right? So it is under the authority of the state auditor's office to audit the legislature, as the state auditor does for every other entity and department in the state of Massachusetts. So this hasn't been done since 1922. It's been 100 years or so, and we are actually mandated to audit every state entity and department every 3 years. So as you can tell, it's been quite a long time. They're up for a review.
But if you have the authority to audit the legislature, why hasn't anyone done it? You say 100 years. I mean, the audit that you're seeking to undertake, if I'm correct, is way more expansive than what was done back then. You've asked for budgeting, hiring, spending, and procurement information regarding active and pending legislation, the process for appointing committees, the adoption and suspension of House and Senate rules, and the policies and procedures of the House and Senate. To a layperson's ear, that's a whole lot of stuff. Why hasn't anyone tried to do what you're doing in the last 100 years if you can do it?
Yeah, the legislature just sort of magically fell off the list at some point and stopped being being audited. But what I can say is I can't speak for other people that came before me. That's up to them to speak for their rationale. What I can say is that we are asking nothing more than to conduct the same types of audits that we do for every other state agency. We do what is known as performance audits in the Office of the State Auditor, where we look at processes, we look at procedures regarding ways to help to shine a light on potentially problematic areas in state government so as to help those agencies to be able to perform better on behalf of the taxpayers they serve. This is an opportunity for the state legislature to work together with our office on increasing transparency and accountability and hopefully equity as well by helping to shine a light on some of the dark areas that might need to have a light shined on them.
I still want to get a better sense of what you might learn as you move forward with this. Let's take one line of the things that you've requested. Information regarding active and pending legislation. What might that include?
So I'm not at liberty right now because of government auditing standards to get into details about any specific audits until the audit report is done. That's a federal organization that actually guides our office on the way to conduct audits. But what I can say is regarding looking at things like active and pending legislation, that's something that I think folks can, or folks know has been a concern through the years. When do members of the general public get access to, what's happening with particular bills? Is it before and not after those bills have already come up for a vote? Do lawmakers and the general public have access to being able to read bills before they are actually voted into law? What's going on with those sets of circumstances? So, left it sort of broad and open so that our audit team has the ability to work with the Government Accountability Office on developing a strategy for how to best audit this agency since it hasn't been done in over 100 years. We want to make sure that we're doing things by the book, the right way, according to the standards that our office is governed by, and that work is currently in process. That plan is being developed as we speak.
Could that also include something like communications with leadership in one or both chambers with rank and file members about how they're expected to vote on a particular piece of legislation, or whether they would, whether it's requested or advised that they vote a certain way?
Certainly conversations could be part of an audit. Conversations with staff, conversations with legislators could be part. Again, those processes are being developed as we speak alongside the Government Accountability Office, who is working in coordination with our office to make sure that these steps are taken appropriately.
And this is the federal GAO that you're talking about?
Yes.
Working with, okay. The next step, if I understand correctly, you've told the legislative leaders that you're going to do an audit. Have you requested information from them yet?
So we have sent an engagement letter. Right. We requested a response to that engagement letter and still have not received a response, unfortunately.
Either from the House or Senate?
Correct. We did hear some comments from the Senate President recently, indicating that it was their opinion that they already had an audit by a private entity that they contracted out with.
And that she doesn't think that you have the authority to do this, that it's unconstitutional from her vantage point.
Well, the argument from the Senate President is that there's a separation of powers, but that argument doesn't hold water because the reality is that our office audits the courts and the judicial system. So, we are not limited in that way. And we're not seeking to tell anybody, we know that we can't make any agency do anything that they don't want to do. It's simply our job, Adam, to shine a light on what's happening, present that information to the general public so that the public is informed about what's happening up on Beacon Hill. And then the legislature does have the right to make their own decisions about any actions that they would take or not take after that audit. So they do have power to govern themselves. We're not asking for power to govern them. We're asking just to see the books.
Just to be clear, you're saying you don't have the authority to tell them how to respond to the findings of an audit, but you do believe you have the authority to compel them to provide the materials.
Correct.
That you're asking for.
Yeah, we're governed by Chapter 11, Section 12 of the Massachusetts General Laws. If anybody wants to go and look at it,
it's a good read.
It lays out very clearly that we are required to do these audits of all these state entities, and the legislature is not exempt on that list. What is exempt on that list is things like personal tax returns, right? So we're not able to go in, nor would we seek to do this, and do any sorts of, personal investigations. Any personally identifiable information is generally redacted when we conduct our audits. We are not the AG's office. We're not the Inspector General's office when we go into these agencies. Our job is to audit, to examine, again, the processes and the procedures so as to help agencies identify gaps that need to be filled so residents can be better served.
A couple more questions about the legislative piece, and then I got to hustle to a little more of what you're doing. So in your engagement letter, you said, when we tell you we want whatever information we ask for from you in the legislature, you've got 72 hours to provide it to us. If they don't provide the information that you ask for, when you ask for it, within 72 hours, what do you do next?
We're going to be sending a follow-up letter we're planning on sending a follow-up to the Speaker and the Senate President and others who were copied in on that communication and hope for a response. But we are going forward with trying to schedule meetings with them and hope that they will be responsive. Again, you know, this is something that we view as an opportunity to work together to help to increase accountability, and I hope that everybody in the legislature would welcome that opportunity, so especially during Sunshine Week.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you're not looking to fast forward to a court challenge if the legislature doesn't provide the materials that you ask for when you ask for them. You want to try to use suasion rather than the courts, or am I getting that wrong? I don't want to put words in your mouth here.
I hope that the courts do not have to be involved in this conversation. They shouldn't have to be involved in this conversation. That is a path that I said I would take if necessary. But again, I am hoping that legislative leadership will come around, will decide that it's in the best interest of taxpayers to work together, again, to conduct an audit that every other state agency receives. The legislature should not be above the law, you know, especially when it comes to things like transparency, accountability, and equity in this regard.
So you're also going to be auditing the MBTA, the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority, and I learned shortly before we started this conversation, you're going to be launching an audit of the use of non-disclosure agreements in state government, right? Are you launching that officially next week? Is that when communications will go out?
Which one is this?
Non-disclosure agreements.
Non-disclosure agreements. Yeah. So we are currently, again, in the process of working. I'm a new auditor, so we are calling the Government Accountability Office quite often these days to make sure that we're doing everything by the book in accordance with their standards. And they are guiding us in the process right now of how to best conduct our audit of non-disclosure agreements being used across state government. We have a great example in the state of Montana of an audit that was conducted successfully and actually ended up leading the conversation in the state of Montana on how to better provide for transparency and accountability surrounding the use of taxpayer dollars that fund non-disclosure agreements.
We should mention, many of our viewers will know, some of them will not, that this is a topic of personal interest to you. When you were a legislative aide, you said that you were subjected to sexual harassment. As you left that position, you were forced to sign an NDA. What are the consequences for government institutions, public institutions, when the use of NDAs is widespread, do you think?
So right now there seems to be little to no accountability regarding the use of your taxpayer dollars and the taxpayer dollars of all those watching at home to fund the silencing of public employees who may have been harassed, discriminated against, or abused. Right now, it appears as though folks in various state agencies are able to simply decide to, you know, use non-disclosure agreements with their own process or lack thereof in the institution that they are in charge of, which obviously can lead to opportunities for abuse of taxpayer dollars to fund non-disclosure agreements that maybe should not have been given. Certainly, we want to make sure that our tax dollars aren't being spent to silence victims of things like sexual harassment or racial discrimination or other issues, allowing for perpetrators to abuse our tax dollars to cover up for bad behavior by silencing victims who otherwise may want to speak out about those things so as to fix some of the challenges and identify that there are challenges in an organization.
I was going to say, it seems like it perpetuates or could perpetuate toxic cultures, right? If
Exactly.
the use of NDAs is widespread, not only is it a financial drain, but it keeps these cultures.
And that was my argument in the House of Representatives and in the state Senate, where I sought for years to reform how non-disclosure agreements are used in state government, highlighting that you know, they're able to be abused across state government if there's no accountability. And right now, what I can say is when I went to visit the the comptroller's office years ago, not with the current comptroller, but I went to go visit the comptroller's office, and I did ask for a breakdown of how many of the state settlement agreements had non-disclosure agreement attached to those settlements, just so we could gauge how often they were being used, Adam. And there is no record that's kept in the state of Massachusetts. So you can imagine if there's not even a record of how many exist and how much money was spent on silencing employees about potential abuse, you can imagine that there, may be some room for improvement in the process regarding how they're being used as well. So we're going to take a deep dive into that.
Two more quick questions for you before I let you go. What do your colleagues who you served with in the legislature say to you in private conversations about the audit that you're undertaking? I know that Senate President Karen Spilka has said you can't do this. You obviously disagree. Your predecessor, Suzanne Bump, the auditor, has claimed that you can't do this. But what do the people you served with think?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of legislators who actually welcome the opportunity for an audit, but understand that they may be retaliated against if they support such an effort. That is, something that, I got to see firsthand during my time in the state House of Representatives and in the state Senate, the opportunity for retaliation if you don't vote a certain way or if you challenge the leadership team on certain issues where you may disagree. That fear of retaliation, I think, is a concern for a lot of legislators. Now, some have come out anyways and said that they fully support the opportunity for an audit, that they think it will help the institution to be able to be more transparent and accessible to the people they serve. And then others, a lot of folks have expressed to me that, they might be supportive, but, fear that if they do express that publicly, that their district will be punished, their community will be punished.
Do you think it's a majority in both chambers that would actually support this publicly?
I haven't spoken to that many people to be able to say it's a majority or not a majority. I can say that I've spoken with several of my colleagues.
Final question for you, I promise. Anything else coming up next week that we should be looking out for? Big announcements?
So this Sunday, I'm going to be at the St. Patty's Day breakfast.
Right.
That will be
But you're not going to be auditing the St. Patrick's Day breakfast.
Planning to sing a little song, so we're going to have a little fun this weekend. But,
should we look to that as for clues to what you might be doing next?
I don't know that there'll be clues.
Okay.
I will say that you shouldn't really need clues, though, because I actually have a list that I'm happy to share with anybody of the audits that we are currently conducting. So anybody can ask for information into that. Right. If you have any questions, we're conducting over 70 audits right now of state agencies. Yes.
I will have to because I wanted to ask you about that number and whether you got the resources necessary to do that. I'll have to get you back if you're willing.
Sounds good. I'm happy to come back on.
Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, and happy Sunshine Week.
Thank you. You too. Finally, as we take a closer look at Governor Healey's political agenda over the coming weeks and months, we'd like to hear what you think. Do her priorities line up with the issues that are top of mind for you? What should she be focusing on in your view? You can let us know at gbh.org/Healey-agenda. That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And in the interim, let us know what you think about how we're doing as well. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Reilly Adam. For now, thank you for watching, and good night.